Hello there. Thank you for joining me for this lecture in organizational behavior. We're going to be covering chapter 2 in this recording, and glad you could join me. So chapter 2 is an interesting one because it's talking about some really personal features about your own life, right? So it talks about personality and values. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the screen, and we can get going with some notes. So as you learned last chapter, I'm really big on emotional intelligence and or EQ, emotional quotient. So that comes up again in this chapter. The idea of personality, there's a lot of factors that come into that. And I think as we start to learn in this context about ourselves and learning about how you process and about what inputs kind of guide your decisions, some of that comes down to personality. But we also get this reflective piece that might help us understand others as well. And so when we start talking about personality, I want you to start thinking in that context. That this isn't just about me and my personality, but it's about understanding and respecting your personality. It also, with the idea of emotional intelligence, how I might change my communication to meet you where you're at with your and understanding and respecting your personality. And then to take a next level, if you will, to think as a manager, if I'm responsible for employees or responsible for a certain work product, and I'm relying on these employees to do that work, then I also have to start thinking about their personality and where they're at. So for me, a lot of this, again, this is a business class focusing on management and org behavior. A lot of this is coming down to emotional intelligence. It's my own reflection, my own stuff. It's your own stuff. It's how we're interacting in the workplace, right? How we're interacting as colleagues, and then how I might be overseeing people as well. In some other business classes, and we'll touch on it a little bit in here too, we'll also start in the holistic perspective. I think of it, you start thinking about how maybe your boss or your manager might be affected, with their personality, with their perspectives, and then also how they might view you when you're in the workplace. And so all of this, just having a level of, how can I say this, a level of interaction with this idea, these concepts, you'll be in a better place. You'll understand more. You'll have a certain empathy that will come into place in the workplace for you, and that will benefit you. So I want to just kind of touch on a couple things that came up in the chapter. The 5-factor model, I think, was great. We learned about different 5 factors, and I'll talk about these just really briefly to kind of give some context and some real life picture to this. So the first one, and I'll abbreviate here because you're going to see it in the chart in the model that's in your book, and you'll read about these. But the first one is conscientiousness. It's talking about this skill set of being organized, and in my mind, I automatically go to the extreme, right? When we're talking about being conscientious and organized and detail oriented, on the extreme level, this could be seen as like OCD, right? Somebody who is so hyper focused and into the details. On the extreme level, again, super detail oriented and organized. Again, you're going to be reading other words and other explanations of these. And so forgive me here, just trying to give you a real quick snapshot, some real life picture perspective of what these might look like. Agreeableness. This sounds like it might not be a positive thing, but I think it is. Again, being like considerate, being flexible in the workplace. And for me, this is super important in business because you might have a specific job or a specific role in a company, but oftentimes things come up, things change, and your ability with this factor to be able to flex and pivot in your work product or in your daily tasks to be able to meet a need that the company might have, or that a manager might have, or that the CEO might have, can really positively affect your future at the company. So your ability to do that, to flex with different needs. Basically, the next one is, as I have a hard time saying this, you're neurotic, right? Neuroticism. Forgive me. Think about this as what you might hear that word in a negative term, right? Like that you're being neurotic right now. Anxious is one of the words that comes up in the description on this, but I'm going to describe it, thinking about it as the extreme. Again, this isn't a negative thing. These are just different factors that make up our personality. But in the extreme, we see this intense inward focus. Again, I'm not saying this is bad. At certain levels, this is good to have somewhat of an inward focus, to understand yourself. But this is one of those factors, again, that comes up with personality. Openness to experience. So just being open, being willing to try new things. And that sounds really vague and broad, right? But in business, this comes up a lot, because if you're thrown into a situation that you're not familiar with or you haven't done before, and you're asked to complete a task, can your brain even go there and accept that? Because some people might just shut down and say, well, sorry, that's not my job. I can't do that. You can see how that reaction, whether purposeful or verbal, or maybe it's just, a physical interpretation of you like going, wait a second, I can't do that, might affect your future or your potential promotional opportunities or different things like that at work. So this one, just the idea of being creative. Again, this and agreeable, the idea of being flexible and open to new things. Extroversion. Now, this one we often think of as like an extrovert or an introvert, but as one of the factors, we see extroversion. And on the flip, again, with this too, we think of introvert. We normally think of an extrovert as somebody who likes to go out and spend time and party. The introvert wants to sit home by themselves on the couch. Again, in extremes, both of these can be bad, but that's not what this is really about. When we look at these factors, particularly this extrovert introvert piece, and we'll talk more about this, especially when we get to the Myers-Briggs section too, which is really interesting. For me, it's really about understanding where your natural, like your default is. And so, for example, I usually fall a little bit more on the lines of being an extrovert, because when I'm with people, that can energize me and I get excited and I can have great conversations. An introvert can do those things too, whether they be in their personal lives or at home or at work, excuse me. An introvert can do all those same things, but it's going to be completely draining for them. And so I don't want you to look at these factors and say one way is good, one way is bad. That's not necessarily the case, because almost anybody can do these different tasks when it comes down to it, depending on how motivated you are. And we'll talk a little bit about motivation. But I think we have to realize in ourselves where that natural tendency is. Do I naturally fall in the line of being an extrovert or an introvert? Understanding that about myself. If I'm an introvert and I know I have to go sit in an office all day with 100 other people for 8 hours, I have to prep for that mentally. And after that 8-hour day at work, I might have to re-energize myself by sitting by myself for a couple hours or something like that, right? Which can be a challenge for some people, especially when you have kids and family that you're going home to after work. Not that you can't do it, but the strength, the motivation, the drive behind your work might look different in these different ways. One of the reasons I really like your book is that it's pretty easy to read. And so as you're going through these, again, I'm not looking to recreate the book in my notes here, but I do want to give a little bit of kind of real life perspective to this. And so when talking about work performance, the book does a good job and it has a great chart. And again, I'll do some abbreviating here, work performance. It takes this perspective, your performance, and matches it to your personality. And so what I kind of like about that is it almost gives you a little bit of a to-do. So you've got your personality, and how that affects your work performance. So again, there's not a right or a wrong, there's not a good or a bad here, but we have a situation in the workplace where somebody coming into the workplace, and you come Thursday morning at 8 a.m., they're bringing to the workplace a certain mindset. They have this default personality. And in a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit about emotion as well. That comes in a little bit in chapter 4. But we have these defaults that we're coming in with. We have to be considerate of that. We have to be open to understanding that and to think about that, because that doesn't change, right? This is a default that we all have. Again, I want to challenge you, when you're reading about these concepts, think about work performance. When you're walking into your job, thinking about yourself as the employee, how does your work performance, how is that based on your personality? If we're out partying all weekend for family events and you're an introvert, how are you feeling when you walk into work Monday morning? You're probably going to be exhausted. Well, because of that personality trait, how is that going to affect your work performance? What do you need in the workplace to do your job well? I'll tell you what, your manager wants you to do a good job. If your manager might give you 2 hours in the morning for you to get work done without giving you extra tasks, maybe you can ask for that, right? So advocacy as an employee comes into play here. At the end of the day, if you're doing a great job, your manager probably isn't going to mind giving you a couple hours in the morning for you to situate your stuff. I'll talk about it in a little bit, but I think advocacy and just talking about things can really help when issues arise due to these factors that we're talking about. Personality. Again, chapter 4, we'll talk about more emotions, that kind of thing. So thinking about this in the light of being an employee is important. I think understanding your colleagues. When you're in the workplace and somebody who sits next to you or somebody who sits across from you, understanding their personality and maybe giving them some grace in the sense of knowing that they might not match yours. Maybe I'm an extrovert, but I'm sitting next to you and you're an introvert. If I don't know that, or if I don't think about that at all, I'm going to be so excited to see you Monday morning, and I'm going to want to talk about your weekend and see how you're doing and how was that hiking trip, and you're going to sit there in the corner and say, don't talk to me. And so you can see where that can automatically start to create some conflict in the workplace. So be mindful of yourself, be mindful of other colleagues. And again, for me, long-term, for you all as my students, I think long-term for you. And so, out 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years from now, from the managerial perspective, most people quit their jobs because of having a bad manager. That can look like 1,000 different things, right? Having a bad manager could mean that they're just mean and they don't give you the schedule that you like. It could be that maybe they're just naive and they don't think about this stuff. And so when you're walking in the door Monday morning, feeling upset or feeling exhausted, and your manager doesn't seem like they care, that can really wear on an employee. So when you are in that managerial perspective, you're going to be thinking about this stuff and realizing that your employees, the people that report to you, are going to be having their own stuff, right? They're going to have their own personality. They're going to have their own differences. And that affects the workplace. It also affects how you might manage them. I appreciate how the book talks about how some of these traits, again, they're not good or bad, but there are some really, and some of these words, as you read through them, might have a negative connotation. we think about that in kind of our normal culture and our normal interaction with people as being what are positive and negative traits. But they do refer to something called the dark triad, which I thought was kind of entertaining because it kind of sounds like sinister and like, oh, the bad guys. But really, what the book is talking about is more recent research has shown that there are certain traits that we normally think about as being negative, and if people have these three traits, the dark triad, that it's more likely for them to be involved in behavior that's either unethical or like maybe selfish and not thinking about the company first and that kind of thing. So there is a bit of negative connotation in this, but I think it's more of kind of, for me, I see it as more of a flag, a warning flag. Hey, here's this thing I know about that employee. I might need to check in on them more often, or I might need to, we have to be careful when we treat employees differently in the workplace. But if we're recognizing certain behaviors, then it's okay. We need to document that. And it's okay to take different measures with that employee. But that can't be based off of just how you feel. So we need to be careful about how we're treating people. More likely with this dark triad, these personality traits, right? That would be more likely in misconduct, aggression, unethical behavior, and that kind of thing. So this is one of those reasons why it's important when filtering or when reviewing applications for jobs. Many employers do like to check references. They do like to get copies of your transcripts, because when you say you graduated from X college in 2000 whenever, they want to be able to confirm, hey, is this person telling the truth? That's one of the ways people lie. Education is a big one that people lie about all the time on their applications. And sometimes they might check on those applications after you're working there. How embarrassing is that? You're doing your job and then all of a sudden you get fired because you lied on your application. That happens, unfortunately, in the real world. And the idea, I think, comes down to this world of ethical behavior. And related to this dark triad, if you're willing to lie about this to get hired, then what else are you willing to get lied about, to lie about? What other unethical behavior are you willing to do if you're going to do it on your application just to get in the door? So again, realizing that certain personality traits, again, doesn't make a person bad, but it's going to have them work and respond to the workplace in different ways. Now on to Myers-Briggs. So I kind of like Myers-Briggs because it seems like a really easy way for anybody to start learning about themselves. And it's probably the most popular tool that's out there when we're talking about self-reflection and understanding yourself. And what also is great about this too, like I hopped online just to see what tools are out there right now that are at your fingertips. And I found pretty quickly a free tool where you can take the test. The one I saw, late night lectures. The one I saw was on truity.com. I just Googled it. I said Myers-Briggs free test, and I got several links and I clicked like on the second one. There were a lot of questions. I think there were 10 or 15 questions per page and about 7 pages. And so it took me some time. And although I've done it in the past, I thought, hey, it'd be fun to kind of do this right now during this class. And so I went through and did it myself, free. And at the end of those 7 pages, it gave me my initials. What I like about Myers-Briggs is it not only is a test readily accessible and you can get it for free, of course, those websites would love for you to pay for their service and to get more information in depth about yourself and maybe even learn some tools on how to improve different aspects of your personality. But it's easy accessible, and I really appreciate how they title their categories, if that makes sense. So again, I'll break it down here. You'll see it in the chart in the book. Holy cow, I'm sorry. I need to switch from my tea to my kombucha. There we go. The first one looks at how we get our energy. Again, this is the introvert extrovert thing we've already kind of talked about. Again, you're going to read this all in the book, but I think in talking about it in context, I really appreciate seeing the simplicity of how they lay it out. How you perceive information. How you make decisions. And how you orient to the external world. So really, this is looking at these 4 areas and how you personally, inherently, at the root level of yourself, respond to these. What's really interesting too, I appreciate about Myers-Briggs, they give you kind of like a top one, and then maybe another one that could be a top one, and then maybe even a third one that shows, your highest scores. What I think is interesting is that my top 2 scores showed ENFJ. I never remember these. There are people that are so into this, they'll walk around like, oh, what are you? I'm an INFJ. I'm an ENFJ. I never remember these things. But when you do it, and what I liked about the one that I did is it also gave it kind of like a title, right? So mine came out ENFJ. And then it titled it, and it said, I love this, the teacher. So it's kind of cool for me to look at that and go, okay, wait, yeah, the way I answer these questions, right? It's kind of like on a 1 to 5 scale, and there's a neutral in the middle. After going through these 30, 40, 50 questions, it identified the thing that I love to do and I find most fulfilling is teaching. And not just even formal teaching in a classroom, but teaching and explaining problems and finding solutions to problems. That's kind of what drives me a lot. And so I love that, one, it's clear to understand what they're looking at in the Myers-Briggs. It also gives me a pretty clear picture of myself. Even if I didn't know anything about myself, how I answer those questions brings out these identifiers in my personality. Ironically, the second one that was most strong came out ESFJ, which meant that this and S on that second trait was the opposite, right? Or my score was so close that it kind of fell in the middle, close to N and S, both. That second one for me was the provider, which I know is right up there. The third one for me was the commander, which I think is kind of interesting, but it was like talking about leadership and that kind of thing. So again, with the Myers-Briggs tool, super accessible, super easy to understand, a lot of free tools out there. You can use this to learn about yourself if you haven't done it already when you were reading chapter 2. But I've also done this, and I'm not saying that you should do this, but in coming into a job myself, I actually went through and did a Myers-Briggs. I remember being in an interview once. The job was working for a university, working with administrative outreach for the university, and being able to look at this and communicate with the person that is interviewing me to be able to reflect and look at the traits and my scores that came out on this assessment was really insightful for me. I was also learning in that experience that my personal traits, again, my personality traits, they do come into the workplace, and that employer respected that. They also wanted to see kind of who I was at my core and where I could benefit the company. In addition, and we'll talk about this more, how the company can benefit from me being there. Yeah, how I can benefit from the company, right? All right, so just wanted some real practical function for that Myers-Briggs. Can you imagine that as a manager and you're overseeing and responsible for employees, knowing this information about them, knowing what motivates them, knowing if they're a natural introvert or extrovert, and if you're forcing them to work in teams all day, that might not be the best way for them to produce their work product. That might be exhausting for them. And so, again, even if you knew about one of these letters about each of your employees, that gives you some knowledge to be able to interact with them. I mentioned most people quitting their jobs because they hate their manager. In the flip, companies can be negatively impacted because the employee is not happy doing their job. If you have to drag yourself into work and you hate being there every minute, you're not going to be producing a great work product. That's going to hurt the company too. So this information isn't necessarily just about being selfish for yourself or understanding your colleagues or how best to manage other people, but it does truly affect and can positively affect how the company does its work. So this is super important and helpful information in the real world in business. Most companies never talk about this. You all having this experience in this class and understanding and just having an experience and reading about it or listening about it and doing it a little bit about yourself, you're already going to be ahead of the game going into the workplace. Most companies do not deal with this stuff. It's almost too, it's too personal, right? Because oftentimes in companies, they want to keep that company, that work-life balance. They want to separate those two things. But as employees, we spend so many hours in the workplace. Doesn't it make sense that our employer, that our colleagues, our manager would want to know some of this information about who we are? I think so. The next step when we talk about personality comes down to values. What do you value? What do you find important? What motivates you? And again, I don't want to reiterate too much here from the book. There talks about 10 different categories, a bunch of different values, kind of diluted down to, or compressed, condensed down to 10 categories in 4 quadrants. So openness to change, self-transcendence, self-enhancement, conservation. Again, talking a little bit like we did up in those 5 factors. What do we inherently value in our lives? This value, what we value, informs our decisions. When we're in the workplace, if I value money, I'm probably going to make decisions in the workplace that are going to benefit me in dollars or maybe the company in dollars, right? If I value social interaction, I'm going to be making choices that might better impact my team at work versus maybe the work product or the bottom dollar that the company makes. So you can see that the things that we value, I value family. I'm going to probably take more sick days than the person that values money who sits next to me. Not that that's bad. If you have sick days, use them, right? But the idea is those things that we value, they inform our decisions. It's not bad that you value family, right? If you're invested in your workplace, you might start seeing those colleagues and your manager and the CEO as your family. And so that also creates more and very loyal employees. So again, I'm not saying these are good or bad or right and wrong, but the idea is as we start understanding these, how much more can this impact your experience at work? How we perceive things, our value frames our perceptions. And so now perceptions come into chapter 3. So I don't want to go into it here. But think about your initial reaction when you see something. How do you perceive a situation? How do you perceive your required action in a situation? Do you have to do something? How will you act? A lot of that is dependent on this perception that you have. Our values also regulate our behaviors. So if you value in your life honesty, and your boss comes to ask you a question and you're going to be telling the truth, but maybe that hurts one of your colleagues. Maybe that hurts your own, your boss's perception of you, right? If you're going to be totally honest, that value is going to change my behaviors. Some ways too, again, I want to flip this a little bit. This isn't about good, bad. This is really about motivation. Yeah, sorry. How do we motivate ourselves? How do we motivate our colleagues? How do we motivate our managers? As a manager, how do we motivate our employees? As a company, how do we motivate the workforce? As a workforce, how do we motivate the company? Think about it that way too, right? If all the employees have a specific need, have a specific value, how do we impart that on the company? And so some kind of easy identifiable ones right now, like Chick-fil-A, if you like their food, they're closed on Sundays, and they find value and a high priority in their employees being with family or having a time off on a Sunday. So all of their restaurants are closed on Sundays. Kind of interesting. Normally, that's not a great business model, right? Normally, you think for food, the weekend is going to be your big dollars, but that's not necessarily what they value, right? They value that time for their employees and for their families. Another one that does that is Hobby Lobby. I know they're closed on Sundays too. And you think about buying crafts or products, that's a big move for a company, right? Saying, yeah, we sell retail, we sell fast food, but we're not going to be open on Sundays. And so that explains some of their values. And you would look at that and say, as an employee, maybe that expresses or that matches your own values. So being in that workplace and having that connection to the company and that shared value might actually help your work product as well. We think about this matching of the value. The book calls it congruence or incongruence, either way, where if my value matches the company's value, that this actually creates more satisfied employees, that I'm going to be happier at work. I'm probably going to do a better job. I'm going to stay there longer as an employee. That benefits the company. And so we also see the flip. The company might also want to aim to match the value of the employees, because again, if employees are there working hard, are there for longer periods of time, there's less turnover. That's good for the company too. All that being said, so again, this term is congruence. The idea of matching values between employee and company. But I want to make a note here. The book mentions it too. This is kind of a loaded term right now, diversity. But it's true to any business. We want to have motivated employees. We want to have dedicated employees. This congruence helps that when the employee has a shared value with the company. However, diversity always helps a company. We might have certain perspectives of that term, especially right now in the last couple of years. But I'm going to say this as broad as I can. Diversity of thought helps a company. When you have somebody that's willing to step up and say, what about this? I know you all are on board with this decision and you love this direction, but did anybody think about that? The ability for somebody to step up and have a diversity of thought, which comes from culture, it comes from work experience, it comes from life experience and age, all sorts of stuff, right? This diversity of thought. But diversity as well, congruence, right, helps employee motivation. Diversity always will help a company, because that questioning, that alternate perspective, it almost always helps. Even being forced to think about it, even if you go the original route, having that person or that, what do you call it, that branch or that team or whatever it is, it could be an individual person saying, hey, excuse me, what do you think about that? Just that interaction alone will help a decision and usually comes out to a better decision. Diversity is good for companies. So you don't have to think about hiring only the people that match your values. Diversity is good. We come into this next section, really interesting section, ethics. Ethics is interesting because what ethics is based on And you might hear these terms and you kind of have an idea of what they are, right? But at the end of the day, what we're looking at is really personal. Again, we're talking about values in this chapter. Sorry. In personality, right? These traits that live within us at the core. Morals comes into play here. Now, I'm going to ask you to think about this. When I say the word ethics, or when I say maybe even more so the word moral, you might think of some level base of good and bad for you. In cartoons, especially older cartoons, we would see on one shoulder an angel and on one shoulder a devil, and they would be telling the cartoon character to do one thing. No, you should do this thing. This is good. This is right. No, this is fun. You should do it this way. This kind of back and forth in that perspective gives us or creates this idea that we could go the right way or the wrong way, the good way or the bad way. And I'm going to ask you to think about this. Where do you think that comes from? Where does this sense of morals, this sense of good and bad, right and wrong, where does that come from for you? Uncomfortable 10 seconds. Maybe it comes from a parent. Maybe it comes from a grandparent, a brother, a sibling, brother, sister, an aunt, uncle, something like that. Sometimes it comes from family, right? This at an early age, somebody telling you, no, you cannot, hit your friend. That hurts them. That's not okay. Right there, right? That interaction is telling us what I can and or should or shouldn't do. Peers. You're at school and you take your friend's chips and they get really mad and they say they're never going to be your friend again. That interaction gives you kind of a defined action that says, hey, what you just did is wrong. I'm not going to do that anymore. This is the right thing to do. We share, right? Or whatever that is. Maybe it was religion, right? Some sort of book or set of rules that we're following. This is what we should do. This is what we should not do. This creates an idea of right and wrong. So it's not a set thing, but at some point in your life, you start learning these, what you should or should not do. And I want to think about this. I'm going to give you another uncomfortable 15 seconds here to think about this. There's somebody in your life, and let's actually think about a person here. Somebody in your life that you really want to make proud. Somebody that when you get an A on an exam or an A on a paper, or you get a promotion at work, or you accomplish that goal that you've been aiming for, you go, oh, would be so proud. Think of that person for you in your mind right now. See their face. 10 seconds. I wanted to do this with you because at the end of the day, when we talk about ethics and morals and making a decision that's either good or bad, right or wrong, it usually comes down to the person. It comes down to me and what I think is right or wrong in that situation. My grandpa is, a little bit of a traditional experience here, but my grandpa on my mom's side was just a loving, nice man. And he got pretty sick when I was young, and I got to help take care of him when I was like, a kid. And I remember he's like the first person that I know that I was close to that died. And so when something happens, when I completed my doctorate degree, and my mom says, "Hey, son, your papa would be so proud of you right now." There's something about that to me that is like, yeah, I'm doing the right. I did a good job. There's something about that. Even though I only had a couple, years, 10, 12 years or something knowing him. And so I wanted you to think about that person for you, because when we make these decisions in life, we usually have some level of, right, who is it that taught me that right or wrong thing? Who is it that I want to make proud in my decisions? In business, this is what drives ethical behavior. In business, there are several things we can do. We might create a code of conduct. When a new employee walks in the door, they sign a code of conduct and they say, I'm going to act in this way at the workplace. I'm going to be professional. I'm not going to have relationships with my coworkers. There's whatever this is. I'm not talking about the law. The law clearly defines what we cannot do. This is a code of conduct. This is things that we should do or how we should act. Yeah, some things we shouldn't do too. Maybe under the code of conduct, there's mention of a dress code or a different language that we shouldn't use in the workplace. But everybody's going to agree to it when they come in. That's great. That company can establish in some ways what their values are with the code of conduct. At the end of the day, though, when you're sitting at your desk and I'm sitting at my desk, at the end of the day, it's our decisions that guide the ethics in that workplace. It really does come down to my grandpa or your parent or a sibling or family member that really helps guide your understanding and your action towards what is the right thing to do. Some companies might also work to train their employees on ethics, maybe even as part of your evaluation. So in your job, maybe you have a 6-month evaluation, an annual evaluation that goes over specific areas and it looks at how you're doing your job. Maybe one of those evaluation areas is ethics, and it comes up how you might be acting ethically in the workplace. Again, that's a little bit more personal than a blanket code of conduct. But at the end of the day, again, it really comes down to our individual actions, our individual beliefs that drive the ethics of a company. So when we hear big court cases about Wells Fargo defrauding, millions of their customers, or a car manufacturer lying in their engineering design to pass certain tests that aren't accurate, we can blame the company, we can fine the company, but at the end of the day, it was the ethics, it was the actions, the decisions of individual people that culminate into that company moving in a certain direction. This chapter 2 in your book also mentions values across different cultures. I'll just make a quick note of this because I really appreciated them putting this section in there. It actually will talk about different countries in the book. It talks about different countries and the different values that are prevalent in that culture in the country, which I think is an interesting little read. Not a big section of the chapter, but I appreciate it because one of the things that we can guarantee that we will experience in the US, in California, in our business experience is that there's going to be diversity in your workplace. That the value that I have, the belief in right and wrong that I have could be different from that of the person sitting next to me. And understanding just accepting that, right? You're going to be better off for it. I'm not asking you to look at somebody and guess what their value is, or look at somebody and guess what country they're coming from and relate them to the book and the chart that shows these different values. But the idea and just understanding that we can disagree. I was in a 2-hour meeting today, and there was a question that came up that had a very clear perspective, and I had a very clear different perspective. The fact that in my workplace, I could say, hey, I respect your opinion. This is what I have experienced. We're two adults. We have, in essence, the same job, but our employment is not dependent on each other. It's not my boss or anything. We can professionally disagree. Do it in a way that is not putting each other down. We can have a conversation and share our perspectives, and we can disagree on things as adults. That's okay. I feel like over the last couple of years, especially, we have come to a place where if you don't agree with me, I believe you're wrong. And, there's no way we're going to come to terms with that, right? I'm right, you're wrong. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Especially the last couple of years, this has gotten so extreme where you have family members or lifelong friends that aren't anymore because of their different opinions. And it's kind of sad. It's kind of sad. In the workplace, that would be I can't even think of a word more extreme, but just detrimental, right? The company is going to be hurt if you have an employee or you have a team or you have a manager that can't recognize that values across different cultures, across different age groups, right? Culture is such a broad term. It could be that we grew up in the same city and went to the same school, but we have different experiences at home, right? That's a different culture. And that can drive our values and our personality, as we've been learning here. So just being in the workplace and realizing, understanding that this exists and that this diversity is actually good for a company, respecting that difference in values across different cultures, I think is hugely important and can actually benefit you as an employer, a company, a manager, even as an employee. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for being here and for listening about chapter 2 here. Thanks.